So let me introduce ourselves a little bit more formally. Stephen and I have been friends and colleagues for about 10 years.
Maybe,
And
yeah.
5 years ago, we got invited to speak at a conference, and we said, well, let's make a pitch so out there that they'll say no, and we don't have to do anything. And we pitched to develop a game that would help communicators improve their advising skills. And you know what happened? They said yes. So we had to build it, and we created this business simulation called Corporate Snakes and Ladders. And what, to our surprise, it was such a success in New Orleans that colleagues started asking us, can you come and bring it to my company and help my team? And we started doing it as a favor. And then we decided, well, there's a business here. This is something we could do to help others. And that was 4 years ago. And that's how Archetypical became Archetypical. And the name comes from the concept of archetypes, because, well, each and every one of us is unique and have our context and our circumstances. There's something about humans that makes us similar. And borrowing from Jung, we chose to use archetypes to help people learn through the eyes of others. And that's the fundamental thing against where we develop all of our products and our models, and with a little twist. So neuroscience and people in learning and development and kids know that in order for you to learn, your brain has to be relaxed. If you're stressed, you won't remember things. I'm sure you all remember exam stress and boring stress. You don't remember. But if you're having fun, it sticks. So it's not by chance, and it's not just because we like it, that the session today is going to be fun and trying to connect what we're teaching you, if I can use that word, to things that make you happy and you can emotionally connect to them. So hopefully it'll work, and we love feedback because as we test our models all over the world, there are certain cultural references. Some work better than others in some places than others. So we've tried to be quite universal for Western standards, which is the one that we're going to present today, but we love to improve. So feedback is welcome.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk specifically about influencing styles, which is one of the tools that we use in our work. And it's really about thinking around how we can make an impact and how you can improve how you get things done. And we can all think of probably stories where, you know, we've worked with a colleague, maybe more senior or maybe a peer in our organization or possibly a client. And, you know, you've tried to influence them to do something and it's worked out really well. And you think, yes, I've got this. And then a week or so later, you try the same trick with somebody else and it doesn't work. And I think, you know, one of the challenges of, you know, building and growing our careers is how do you find the best way to make an impact and to influence people in different situations. And so a couple of years ago, we were asked to build this in some work we were doing with the UK government. And it's really about how do we help people in communications work with senior leaders or other functional roles or their clients to really think about how they can make an influence and how they can create some impact in those situations. And, you know, the first question that is really worth asking is, you know, what is influence and what's so new about our model? And what we wanted to discuss was our model today, which is called Recipe, which is really about your recipe for influence. And we're going to talk today about what the recipe is. Each of those 6 letters stands for one influencing style. And hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll not only be able to remember the model, but each of the 6 styles. And our plan is to, you know, give you clues to remember those styles and to be able to think about the different styles in different situations. Casilda.
And much like a recipe, it's all about mix and match. The recipe has 6 ingredients. The best influencers are able to modulate the way you mix it and apply it to different situations. When we go through the styles, you'll distinguish that naturally we all tend to navigate to one or the other. The trick is to understand which one is your personal preference, when it works, and when your style might not work. So you have now, instead of just one style, you will have another 5 to play with.
Yeah. So by a show of hands, or using the hand icon, who's been on an influencing styles course before? One, couple, two or three. Okay, so the challenge that often comes on this is, for those who've been on influencing styles courses, you can probably remember your own influencing style and your own preference. But I challenge you really to think about the other styles in that model. And one of the challenges of influencing style models is they're really good and they're thoroughly academically researched, but they're often quite hard to remember.
If you can't remember the model, how can you put it in practice, right?
So we did some research into this and discovered that, there are lots of different approaches to influencing, lots of different styles. Those of you on the call who've worked with me before in previous jobs will recognize a couple of these examples. And our kind of challenge when we were trying to review this is to think about, okay, these models are great, but they're sometimes hard to use, and you need to remember all the different styles and need to think about which one to use. And we wanted to come up with a way which was really easy to remember for you, and maybe is not 100% best practice, but is what we call best practical. So we hope by the end of today there'll be a model that you can use, which not only can you remember the different styles, but also be aware of your own preference. And maybe sometimes when you need to operate in an area which is not your comfort zone, or sometimes maybe even find someone else who can help you influence in a different situation. And so that model is what we call recipe. Casilda.
Yeah, and so we have 6 styles: reward, exchange, connect, inform, picture, and exit. So the acronym will help you remember. And in the next few minutes, we're going to go through each of them and some archetypes that we think represent the style. So this is a little bit artificial. Not everybody uses each of these all of the time. As I said, it's a recipe, but it's a very useful tool to start experimenting. And I would invite you to choose some low risk scenarios when you can flex your style. So as we go along, if you discover that your favorite style is inform, try to practice connect or exchange when you go shopping or when you are having a team meeting that's very low risk. So start flexing your influencing muscles in low risk scenarios.
Yeah.
So when you're negotiating a pay raise or pitching for a project or trying to convince a client to do things a certain way where it's high risk, you've got the practice.
Yeah.
And without further ado, take us to reward.
Okay. All yours.
Oh, okay. So in the chat, please, who can tell me who this is? Gates, yeah. Obviously, it's very good. Yeah, okay. And so what is his main claim to fame at the moment? What would you associate with Bill Gates? And there are many things, but I'm going to focus on one. Yeah, exactly, philanthropist. Peter, thank you.
Peter.
If you want to believe that, we are not judgmental. The point is he will put the microchip in the vaccine for free.
Yeah, and they'll have lifetime access to Windows operating service.
And can you click?
Oh, sorry.
So it is, we associate Bill Gates with reward. What does reward mean? Think about the philanthropy. Is when you are giving something for nothing. And in influencing skills, this is a very useful tool to use only when you have no short-term need. When I was working for a big multinational, the chairman told us, never underestimate the power of a cup of coffee when you don't need anything from someone else. So in the grand scheme of things, this is when community outreach begins with opening your doors and having cups of coffee and having lots of conversations in order to establish a long-term relationship. At an individual level, this is an influencing skill that is very common at the beginning of your career. I can certainly say at the beginning of mine. You know, you want to prove that you have a contribution to make. And so all those extra little things that you do for your employer when you're trying to earn your reputation are reward. Every time you work late for nothing, most of us don't get paid overtime. So every time you work late, that's reward. Every time you give this little extra effort to make things better without a clear exchange, without getting something in return immediately, is reward. So it's fantastic. It's very useful. It creates trust, but beware of only using reward because you can risk diluting your contribution. If you work late every time, there's nothing extraordinary about that. And then your time might not be as valued. So it's a balance act.
Yeah.
And that's reward. Stephen?
Yep. So the next style is exchange. Does anybody recognize this person? If so, put it in the chat. Pepsi CEO, yeah. Yes, Hendrik, you're correct. It's Indra Nooyi, who's technically now the ex-CEO of PepsiCo. And she's our symbol for exchange. So if you can't remember exchange, you can think of her. Just like if you can't remember reward, you can think of Bill Gates. And she's our symbol of exchange because when she was offered the job of CEO of Pepsi, she made a deal with one of her colleagues. And many of you who've worked in large corporations will know that quite often when there's two internal candidates for a CEO job and one of them gets it, it's quite common for the other unsuccessful candidate to leave the organization and become CEO of maybe a competitor or another company. In her case, she got the job, but she knew that the other candidate could add so much value to Pepsi. And so she wanted him to stay and not follow the traditional path of leaving and joining somewhere else. So they made a kind of exchange deal that she influenced him to stay in exchange for giving him extra responsibilities and some special projects. And so exchange is when there's a kind of two-way commitment to the deal. And so when you have exchange, there's some kind of deal going on, and you quite often have something the other person needs or wants. One thing I would say about exchange, though, is that it's different from a transaction. If I go to the grocery store and buy some groceries, theoretically there's an exchange because I'm influencing to give me milk and bread and vegetables, and they're influencing me to give them some money. But that's not really influencing, that's a transaction. And so where exchange works well is, because you're both doing something that you both want. But clearly, the other clear thing is the exchange doesn't have to be equal or of equal value. So if it's a pure equal value, money for goods, then it's a transaction. But maybe what's happening here is you're both making a contribution to each other's success. So a couple of years ago, I was working for a technology business. I was in the HR and training function. And, we had a company full of engineers. And there was a big sort of conference coming up. And several of our engineers were presenting at this conference. And I said, look, as part of my role in training, I will offer you free presentation training course. And we can have a little tutorial and go through your slides, and I can give you some hints and tips on presenting. Probably not as good as some of the stuff that Peter does in his job, but I was happy to help them in my role. And I said, all you need to do is look in my diary and find a little spot and make an appointment and we can have a chat. So I made them do something in order to access this training. And some of them did and some of them didn't, but it was a kind of test of that mutual commitment. And so when you have exchange, it's often about just checking that the other person has something that they're interested in or is really interested in continuing the relationship. Early on in my career when I was working in consulting, I'd go to clients and we'd have a lovely conversation. And then I would say, well, shall I write you a proposal for some work? And they would say yes. And I would be very happy thinking, great, they'd like a proposal from me. But actually, there was no commitment from them you know, they were happy to let me do all the work without making any kind of commitments from their side. And so what I should have done is, you know, find some kind of method of exchange. You know, if I do a proposal, would you introduce me to so-and-so? Or could you send me that information on your current business challenges or something which tests the other person's commitment? So exchange can be a two-way thing, but it can also be a way of making sure that the other person is in the game of wanting to be influenced. And that's where you can make sure that you're maybe not doing complete all reward, but that you're getting a little bit back as well. So I'm now going to hand back to Casilda, who's going to talk about the next style.
I take it you all recognize the two very famous players here. So my question to you is, have you ever heard of the famous Clinton handshake? Nope, nope. Yes. Okay, Rene Gutierrez. Are you brave enough to talk and tell us about what the famous Clinton handshake is all about? There's no wrong answer.
No, I read a piece about Bill Gates' way of connecting to people and really influence, like meeting people with his handshake and with always knowing something about that person and being really warm and sort of engaging, and that really sort of captures people like very incredibly. So that's what I read about it.
You've got 10 points. Stephen, let's them show what's the name of this style? Connect. You got it. So the Clinton handshake was defined as whoever you are, when Clinton shakes your hand, he makes you feel as you're the most important person in the room. And funnily enough, in this slide, we actually think, I personally think, that it's Obama doing the connecting. Look at those lovely doopy eyes Clinton is giving him. So connecting is about focusing on the relationship and the personal link you can make to that person. Next slide, please. This is a very useful skill where politicians, good ones, excel. And it is very important, it is very important to use this skill when you are trying to build a long-term project, when you know you're going to be working with some people for quite some time. A very good idea is to invest time in connecting. And yes, learning about something about the other party is important, but not only necessary simply by me saying, Rene, I think you've done a great contribution. We can do this together. Let's try to explain to the rest of the group what the handshake is. And I'm looking directly at you. Suddenly we're making a connection. See, it works. You smiled. What is very important, again, is not to overuse the style. Because particularly when you are a manager, don't lose sight of connection versus desperately trying to be liked. So it's a balance. Connect with your employees and make them sure you see them as human beings, you know, and particularly if you're advising a leader. But in a position of authority, you have to acknowledge that there's a boundary. And connect cannot be your only style. You have to mix connect with exchange sometimes.
Yeah. And reward, exchange, and connect are at three different ends of a spectrum, as it were. You know, in reward, you're investing in and growing and nurturing the relationship and kind of putting reputation points in the bank. Whereas in connect, you're often taking them out of the bank and saying, you know, Casilda, you and I have worked for 10 years together. You know, can you just do me this favor now, please? And, you know, because we've worked together and we've got that relationship, we can afford once in a while to take a few beans out of the reputation bank to get what we need. And so that's why, you know, reward is about investing and connect is about withdrawing from that relationship or taking the interest, if you prefer. And I think the challenge for a lot of people is, you know, if you get the balance between those two a bit wrong, it can create problems. You know, I know lots of people, and certainly in the beginning of my career, I did a lot more reward than connect. And so I grew this great balance of reward, but I never cashed it in.
Renee, you had a question? Oh, sorry, Stephen.
That's okay. The opposite can also be true, because if you try to do too much connect, eventually you become overdrawn in your reputation bank, and people don't want to work with you or don't respond to that particular approach anymore.
Yeah, and so Renee, you wanted to make a comment.
I'm sorry, I came into the room 5 minutes late, so I don't know when to ask questions or not.
Oh, I don't think we said it's not you,
No,
it's us.
go for it.
Please interrupt us, and we have enough time to have a really good chat, so go for it.
Yeah.
So I find this very interesting because I just read this book that actually Anissa recommended to me. It's called Never Eat Alone, and by Ferrazzi. And he's a very, very successful influencer, actually, and or influencer, I should say. And he talks about this style a lot, and mentions Bill Clinton. That's where I read that thing about Bill Clinton. And he argues that actually one should exercise that connection muscle as much as you can, and not see it as withdrawing, but actually really as much as possible, because he describes it as being, or I will sort of paraphrase for a second, really as you being the platform of connecting people with favors and things, and I can do this for you, you can do that for me, and like really constantly be in this connecting mode, and not think of it as withdrawing from the bank. What would you say about that?
I would say that we're talking about two slightly different models, and as I said at the beginning, this is all artificial, right? It's ways of putting things in boxes so we can play in real life. So the way you describe his model, we would say, we absolutely agree. We would simply divide that between reward and connect. And he would put both activities under the connect umbrella. But you're right. We get energy, we're human beings, by interacting. Yeah. And I would absolutely agree with him that flex your muscles, but don't only flex your connect muscles.
Yeah.
Flex your recipe muscles.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and creating those connections and, not eating lunch alone is a way of investing in those relationships, and, throwing some seeds on the ground, and things might, happen. And so the difference between his connect and our connect is about using that relationship for influence, whereas his connect is more about just building connections more widely and growing your network.
And we have a question from Tanya, who says, how would you exercise this style in the virtual environment? Same way. So for example, I connected with Renee earlier, just by asking her a question. If we were conducting a project, for example, and we stumbled on a disagreement, if I turn to, I don't know, let me say, Anissa, I know you might disagree, but we've been working together for so long. Trust me on this. Our relationship, I'm making the argument of going a certain way based on our relationship. It has nothing to do with the actual physical world. I am using our relationship and our connection to try to influence behavior. Does that answer your question, Tanya? Yeah? Okay. Oh, next one. I love the next one.
Next one.
As communicators, we love this one a little too much.
So who recognizes this person? Yep. So Emma Watson or Hermione Granger from Harry Potter. So if you're a Harry Potter fan, you will know that her style or her default behavior is often to look in the library and do some research. And, whenever she's trying to influence Harry or Ron to do something, or more generally not to do something, she'll cite the data and, the previous history and look in the books for what is the right answer. And so her style is called inform. And that's a style based on facts and data and logic, or as much as you can achieve in the world of magic. And it's a common influencing style when you're, wanting to use facts and data to influence someone. And so what it looks like is when you're citing evidence or you're giving reasons for someone to do something, if you're presenting a lot of facts and figures, it's important. What I would say though is, as communication professionals, we definitely need to use inform as part of our work, but we also need to use some of the other tools and some of the other models in some of the other examples in the recipe model. So you can use it well, but it's not the only style.
And the more we learn, if you have been following disinformation and politics and how you can address behavior, for example, during the pandemic, we know that facts alone do not change behavior. We know that there's something called confirmation bias. So your brain will use the same facts to confirm what you already believe. Which is why if you only use inform to try to influence your stakeholders, you might fall short.
Yeah. And inform is a very important style in business, but it works particularly well if you're able to combine it with the next style.
And for this style, it's counterintuitive, but please close your eyes. Mm-hmm. You all ready?
Yeah, close your eyes.
Okay. I take it you all recognize the song. So did you get transported to this magical world? I take it when you listen to the words from the Beatles, they're so descriptive and so clear and so detailed that they're not asking you to do anything but imagine what Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds world would be. Next slide. And this is incredibly powerful if you are having a big group and you have to make them all behave more like a rowing team than an athletics team. In an athletics team, we all train together and then poof, you go and compete by yourself. But if we want to build rowing teams, teams that move together and achieve a common goal, the best way of bringing those together is by using picture. So this is the kind of language that we see in big political speeches. And combined with inform, it's incredibly powerful. So when you're, for example, pitching projects, and we use this quite a lot, we start not by telling the product or the faces but we start by painting the picture of what the end result is. So if you were inviting us to talk about influencing styles, we would tell you, look, imagine a session after an hour, all of the participants are smiling and feel like they connected to each other and walked away with a tool that they can use in their everyday lives. The more descriptive you are, and then you can give the better, and then you can give the data points that make your case. It is a very powerful way to open and close presentations. And have you ever read Nancy Duarte? Nancy, I recommend her books for communication. We'll send you the link for helping your CEOs communicate better to big groups and big audiences, and use very widely known storytelling techniques to move people into action.
Yeah. So now we're going to move on to the sixth and last style. So whereas at the beginning we had reward, exchange, and connect, which are great when you're trying to influence in one-to-one or small groups, and maybe there's an existing relationship or you're trying to grow a relationship. Inform and picture are a bit more mass market. They're good for large audiences or groups where you don't really have much of a relationship with. Now I'm going to talk about the last style, which we call exit. The example here is the person on the top right, whose name is Chrystia Freeland, and she's the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. And you may remember a few years ago, Canada and the European Union were trying to negotiate a free trade deal. And the negotiations threatened to collapse. And what I want to do is play a little video of her being interviewed after the collapse of those discussions. So the video is in French, but there's subtitles in English. And it's about a minute or so long. So I'll just play that and then I'll talk about it.
Nous avons travaillé très fort avec la Commission européenne et avec beaucoup de pays, des membres États de l'Union européenne, y compris l'Allemagne, la France, l'Autriche, la Bulgarie, la Roumanie. Le Canada a travaillé vraiment, et moi personnellement, j'ai travaillé très fort. Mais il semble évident pour moi, pour le Canada, que l'Union européenne n'est pas capable maintenant d'avoir un accord international, même avec un pays qui a des valeurs si européennes comme le Canada, et même avec un pays si gentil et avec beaucoup de patience comme le Canada. Le Canada est déçu. Moi, personnellement, je suis très déçue. J'ai travaillé très, très fort. Mais je pense que c'est impossible. Nous avons décidé de retourner chez nous. Et je suis très, très triste, vraiment. C'est une chose émotionnelle pour moi.
So the negotiations have collapsed and she's walking away. There's a bit later on in the interview where she says, the only good thing about this is I get to go back to Montreal and see my kids. So she did a kind of rather dramatic exit. She'd failed to influence the European Union to negotiate a free trade deal. However, those of you who know your history will know that actually a deal did get signed. And the second part of this is that a few days later, she returned back to Brussels and they resolved the issues and the deal was signed. And so exit is the strategy that I want to talk about here, which is really about when you feel you're not getting anywhere in influencing, you can sometimes take a step back and just pause the discussion and maybe try to re-engage at a different date or in a different way. So exit is not about walking away, because if you walk away, you don't influence. But exit is about temporarily breaking or changing the dynamic so that you can influence. And you don't always have to be as dramatic as, you know, almost crying in front of the media and getting on a plane back to Canada. There are more subtle ways of influencing, of exiting. So, you know, sometimes you can say, let's take a break, or let me reflect on your question and come back to you. You know, can you give me 5 minutes? I'm busy right now. You know, and it's a good technique when, you know, maybe you need to change gear. If you've been doing a lot of inform on somebody and it's not working, and suddenly you swap to picture, that change of gear can be a bit abrupt. So maybe taking a little break or a pause can help you change gear, a bit like, you know, for those of you who drive manual cars, pushing the clutch down to change gear. The other thing you can do with exit is actually, sometimes you might discover you're the wrong person. You know, maybe you discover that the person you need to influence is really going to be driven by picture, and they're a real visionary person, and they're really kind of, they like, you know, talking about the future. And maybe that's not your particular strength. So you might think, I need some picture here, but I'm the wrong person for this. My colleague will be able to help me do that. So exit can be a moment to take a break and to recalibrate the relationship and making sure you reestablish the time to reconnect.
One thing to remember, oh, sorry, Stephen.
Go ahead, that's all yours.
I was just thinking, as this is a communications network, because of our profiles and we get attracted to this profession, it's very likely that we like to help. and we like to be the can-doers, and we like to support internal clients. And that means exit is not our favorite style sometimes. I used to have this really senior woman at a development bank who used to routinely come and drop by my desk and said, "Oh, do you have a minute?" And it always turned into a ask that was creating a lot of work and not necessarily for the value that we needed. And I was scared of her. And every time I saw her come by my office, I had a knot in my stomach. And to be honest, the day I found out that no matter how senior, it was perfectly okay to say, and I remember her name was Catherine. And I was like, "Catherine, remember the first time I did this? I think this is really important. I think this requires a proper meeting and a proper time to discuss so I can help you properly. Would you mind sending me an invitation so we can discuss it at a later date at your convenience?" And just setting those boundaries of saying, because I do communications, that doesn't mean I'm the waiter that you can just come and say, "Give me this dish, I need it tomorrow." But actually you need to take the time to brief me properly, change the dynamic, and I felt incredibly empowered.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one to start. That's why I say start exercising with the low risk scenarios. Don't wait to start practicing with your Catherine.
Yeah.
Um,
And what you did there was a bit of exchange. You said, "Of course, I'm happy to meet you. Look in my diary, find a time to meet." And you made her do a little bit of work. In return, you would deliver a lot of work, but she had to make the first tiny step.
And it changed the dynamic. It really meant that she started seeing our function as an equal partner. What you want to do, ideally with every function, is see communications as a business partner, not just the people you call at the end to do a press release, right? So it's a really helpful one. Tricky. It feels a bit uncomfortable sometimes when you're not used to doing it a lot, but worth trying.
So that's the summary of the model. We have reward, Casilda, who's symbolized by.
Let's see who remembers in the chat. Who can remember who was reward? Yeah, good points for Marion.
Yeah.
Okay. Exchange. You don't have to remember her name. Yeah. I never remember her name.
Indra Nuyi. I'll put it in the chat.
Connect, and I'll give points to either one. Yeah?
Yeah.
Obama, Bill, perfect. Another Bill. Inform. Perfect. Picture. Yeah, and exit. We will take name or title. Yeah, excellent. So
here's the thing that's important, and Casilda mentioned about neuroscience at the beginning. Those symbols and those names resonate to us as examples of those styles. You can find the thing that works for you. If you can't remember who Hermione is or can't remember the one from Canada, find some other thing in your head that's going to remind you about exit, that allows you to associate that with that particular style, so that next time you are trying to influence someone, you think to yourself, what would X do here? Or how can I be more like Hermione here? Or, how can I do a bit of exchange? And find something that latches into your brain that helps you remember those 6 styles.